Welcome to Swiftly Spoken, a fan-made Taylor Swift podcast in which we break down her lyrics, deep dive into full album retrospectives, and theorise about what may be coming next. As always, we are your hosts Cameron and Lisa. So this week we're going to be a bit creative and design a sort of family tree out of Taylor's discography by mapping out the connections between her 10 studio albums.
So this is actually an idea that we discussed in our previous episode, but we had on the back burner for quite a long time. But we got very excited about doing it. And basically what we're going to be doing is, as Cameron said, making like a family tree or somehow like a flow chart, in the sense of we want to be mapping out which albums only exist thanks to other albums, or which albums we think are related due to their themes, their lyrics, the sound of them, how two albums may come together to combine into what we think is another album. It's going to make sense as we go through them, and we're going to be discussing like what kind of links that make up the map that we've made, which does look a bit convoluted, but we will be going through it. So the idea in itself stems from Taylor describing Folklore and Evermore as sisters. They're like sister albums, which is an interesting thought if you think about it. In like her discography, how she's always carved out very specific topics, very specific themes, aesthetics for each album, to then go ahead and make them all connected. It's quite an interesting exercise. It was fun to do, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it definitely was. And it was interesting how, as you said, Taylor's always almost basically killed off whatever version of herself created the previous. So for her to extend it and almost make the album after the previous one be a continuation and intrinsically linked sonically, thematically, visually, was just so vastly different. But then actually, when you then look at the albums, as much as she tried, there was always going to be an element of what came before that influenced what then came after. That would be impossible, whether it be, the same story that was being told, or some of the lyricism or, perspective she was looking at. And especially with then Midnights, that was even more of an example of going back at and looking at previous midnights of her life, and therefore previous songs and stuff that she's spoken or written about, and then writing it from a new perspective that also intrinsically ties them all back up together. So even though it often seems like eras are very distinct, I think that actually from doing this, we've realised that they actually all merge into each other, and that, debut links to that one and this one, and, we'll all get into it, but it's quite interesting how when you do look at it, they seem to link more than maybe they initially let on, or we would think.
Right, and it makes sense that every album is kind of, it's one person's discography in the end, but it was still a very fun exercise to delve into Taylor's discography in order to see not just that evolution, but also connections between old music and new music that, have many, many years in between them and still can have a type of connection, and how it all comes together to make this tapestry of work. I don't know, we'll go through it. You guys can let us know if you think we're crazy, if you think these ideas make sense, how you would organise your own. We're calling it a family tree, but really it is just like a mapping out of her whole discography and the relations between each album. But yeah, let us know what you think. And if you do want to see what we're talking about on screen as we go speaking about it, then do check out this episode over on YouTube, because as we go mentioning each album, it will all be up on the screen, so you can kind of follow the flow that we're going through and the connections that are being weaved. But yeah, we hope you enjoy it, because we had a lot of fun discussing it. And with that, I think we should get into one of the most interesting revelations, which is the album we're going to start with. The big album, really. This is the album that connects most, if not all of them.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because obviously it isn't what started. You would maybe think that the one that would link everything is potentially Debut, because obviously that was the one that kicked off her career, and obviously everything's followed since. But we've actually categorised Red as, in the family tree, the kind of mother of all albums, as cringe as that sounds.
Yeah, she is mother. Yeah.
But we've kind of put Red at the top of the family tree.
Yeah.
And linked everything off of that.
Yeah, it's incredibly interesting for me because it is her fourth album. We have had a big discussion about fourth albums, how they sometimes are cursed because of where they sit in a singer's or a songwriter's discography. If you think about it, we've had 3 establishing albums, and for this one to be the main album is so interesting because it doesn't just connect to the previous ones. It also glances towards the future and what's coming next. And not only that, what's coming a long time after that. But no, I definitely think I used to be like, because obviously in the Swiftie fandom, a lot of people do feel that Red is their favourite album, is Taylor's big album. We also always joke about it being Taylor's favourite album. I do think it is one of her favourites for sure, but I never considered it that. I was like, Red, I love Red, don't get me wrong, but it was never like, in my eyes, the most important album. But I do feel like after doing all of this, I haven't given it enough credit as being a really, really staple in her discography for sure.
Oh, 100%, and an essential. And I think one thing, I've always been a Red lover, like, you know that, and anyone that's probably listened for a while knows that Red for me is my favourite Taylor Swift album. So I've always loved Red. And one thing I've always thought about is if someone came to me and was like, give me one Taylor Swift album. Yeah. So if someone wanted one Taylor Swift album so that they knew what Taylor Swift's music was like, and, you know, all they'd really been exposed to is the hits, I feel like Red is the one that you would give them because it does show every kind of facet, and we'll get into that, but every facet of Taylor's career, whether it be the big pop hits, the more slower kind of melancholy ones, the singer-songwriter ones, just everything, country, pop. It really does kind of encompass all elements of Taylor's career, and I think that Red is a very good one to show people of this is what Taylor Swift is about. Yeah. So I think it makes sense why in the end that Red is kind of everything births off of it in this family tree.
Definitely. And that's also a really interesting point that you brought up about showing someone. If you guys do have friends that are a bit like not sure how to get into Taylor, this could be a good flowchart for that. Like if to get into Taylor, let's start with Red. If you enjoyed Red, you can go down this route, this route, this route. So that's actually an interesting thing to keep in mind as we go through these albums as well.
Yeah, definitely, because if you're more drawn towards the pop element, you can go this way. If you are more drawn towards the more kind of singer-songwriter songs, you can go this way, or country. And I think that Red is quite a good way to work out maybe what
you might enjoy,
a listener would be looking for or enjoy, in Taylor's music.
It has a bit of everything, very eclectic. We've always said that's for sure. But then I guess, spanning from Red, we have basically made 3 major arrows that are like the important ones, the 3 ways that you can go in Taylor's discography. And those basically signify the country of it all, the pop world, and then the indie world that she eventually explores down the line, right? So first, I guess, if we're going a bit like in chronological order in some way, from Red, we have one of the major lines, like I just said, which is towards the country elements. So if, like you said, like if you listen to Red and you're finding that you're really enjoying more of those Nashville songs, the country elements of those songs, then you could explore this part of the tree, which is basically the country branch, should we call it. So from Red, we directly go to Debut. I do think Red and Debut are very much related. It's funny to put the arrow going this way instead of the other way, because obviously Debut did come first. But again, this isn't really chronological. This is just how we feel they're connected. But some of Taylor's best country work, in my opinion, is on Red and is very much related to some of the best country work that you can find on Debut. There is no All Too Well without Cold As You, but Cold As You exists in the same conversation as those track 5 country, deep-rooted lyricism elements, that go so well with All Too Well. So I definitely feel the relation is there. How do you feel?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like you said, things like, I Almost Do, Better Man wouldn't exist without things like Tim McGraw and Tied Together with a Smile. I think that, that kind of songwriter and country, really sad country kind of vibe, basically, is, began with Debut. And I think that then off of Debut, obviously, we're kind of linking it as the kind of country that's, birthing off of Red. Obviously, thematically and just chronologically off of Debut then does come Fearless. I think Fearless is a continuation of Debut. The eras themselves merged within each other. There wasn't really a very clear, distinct sonic, thematic or visual change, really, to be honest. I think that with hindsight, it seems like there is, but definitely at the time, and I think
they were
the pre-Taylor's version, they were
very similar. The visuals very similar. Her name was exactly the same font. It wasn't how things were nowadays. Like if you look at her style, it's just a continuation, a little bit of an evolution, but much more of a continuation. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. And I think Fearless, it was more just, just naturally her songwriting had improved. They delved a little bit more into the kind of pop sound and sensibilities a bit more, but it is a direct continuation of Debut, and without Debut there would be no Fearless. And Fearless songs were literally, lots of them were written during the debut period anyway,
and especially with the addition, some of them.
Ironically, and then the addition of the vault as well. Most of those are pre-debut as well. So for me, Fearless is kind of a child of Debut 100%. In the family tree, it comes off of Debut as a child, directly straight down.
Definitely. And in that same sense, that we then have from Fearless, Speak Now. Again, it makes sense to kind of like put these three together in like this flow, because they are the country albums, the main three, mostly purely country. We'll get into Speak Now and some particularities of Fearless as later on. But yeah, no, Fearless kind of does give birth to Speak Now again. And it's connected to Debut because Sparks Fly is there,
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Although I do feel like there isn't a big evolution now. Again, if we look back, the style, it isn't so clear-cut as we see it now. There was still a continuation of her aesthetic. It was just her growing
100%.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And the, again, font-wise was still the same. Hair was still basically identical. Tour outfits were still very similar with the kind of like sparkly flappery dresses and, guitar. And it was all very similar. It's still very fairy tale. I know that often lots of people describe kind of Speak Now's aesthetic as this kind of like, gold frames and fairy tale. That was also very much Fearless when you think of Love Story, the performances on tour were, this gorgeous kind of fairy tale romance. And that was still very similar with Speak Now, just with more maturity. But it is for me still a continuation, and again wouldn't exist without Fearless. Obviously sonically it did kind of grow. There is a real difference between them, and lyrically and stuff, like there is a massive maturity, but I still think it's a child of, but the child has kind of developed its own interests.
It's funny because in a way
had more different life experience.
Yeah, in a way, you have Debut and Fearless, which are like very, very more linked than I feel either of them are to Speak Now. And Speak Now is kind of like the teenager, if you will. She's full of angst. Yeah. She doesn't want to be here. And again, we get into another big connection as we go along, because I feel like it will make more sense. But for now, yeah, I completely agree with you with these three are like they're in their own particular kind of class and very much really related between each other, for sure. The next arrow that we have coming off of Red actually kind of breaks the trend that we've been talking about chronologically, but it is like the indie or alternative era of it all. So from Red, we have an arrow that goes directly to Folklore. And I think this makes a lot of sense when you look at the songwritery elements that exist on Red and also in the Red era. Whenever I think Safe and Sound, I think of just such a big connection between Red and Folklore.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think when Folklore was first announced and we had those, however many hours it was, 12 hours or so in between like the announcement and then the eventual release, all of the things, and obviously all we had was track list, album cover and name, and everyone was talking about Safe and Sound. They're like, this is just going to be an album full of like songs like Safe and Sound. Like, oh my God, that was all that anyone could kind of reference because that was all that Taylor had ever really done that was similar in that sense. And I think there's other songs on Red as well that are very similar, like A Sad, Beautiful, Tragic for me is very kind of Folklore in its kind of way that
it leans into
it's very like My Tears Ricochet.
Yeah, it does. It leans into the storytelling elements of like a lot of metaphor going on, a lot of visuals going on, the train pulling away from the tracks and comparing that to like an argument and a breakdown of a relationship. It is very Folklore in that sense.
Oh yeah, 100%. And even things, and we'll get into these later a bit more, but even because I feel like there's also a backwards influence as well, but even things like Nothing New, which is obviously written for Red, does have a very kind of Folklore sound to it, kind of sonically and also lyrically, but we'll get into the kind of backwards influence, but for now we're working down. But yeah, 100%, that kind of indie storyteller songwriter is definitely directly influences kind of Folklore, I believe.
I do feel it has its origin in Red. However, another thing that we'd like to mention, that I think I pushed for this connection a bit, but you can debate me on it if you like. I also feel like Debut is related to Folklore. If there's an arrow coming from Red to Folklore, we also have to add an arrow from Debut to Folklore, because I feel like Debut, people don't realize that in Debut there is a lot of telling stories from other perspectives, telling stories of other people, telling stories of invented things, which is exactly what she did in Folklore. Obviously she's very diaristic as well, we know this, but there is a side to Debut that is purely just like, I'm just gonna talk about things that don't really pertain to me, but are still interesting stories.
Yeah, because Taylor even said herself that, she was like a 14-year-old. Obviously, she hadn't experienced all these kind of dramatic love stories and stuff that she was singing about. And often she would kind of get inspiration from movies, film, music. And obviously things like Mary's Song is a direct example. That is obviously not about her. It's about neighbours. Even things like Invisible and stuff she wrote when she was like 12, 13. Again, often about stuff that she was seeing and, relating it to herself, but there was still, and Folklore's the same really, lots of it is stories that Taylor can draw from previous experience.
Shrouded in magic and mystery, but I definitely feel there is a big relation to what you're saying, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, and, and even kind of things like Tied Together with a Smile as well is kind of about someone else. And I think that there is that link, definitely 100%. And even slightly sonically in a sense, like for me, when I first heard Betty, the first thing I thought was Mary's Song.
You're right. I forgot about Betty for a minute. Yeah, definitely. That's also an influence.
And that teenage 16, there's lots of Folklore songs like The Love Triangle that are about that kind of 16, 17-year-old teenage vibe that, Debut is the age of that. That album is a 16-year-old. Yeah. And those kind of, that love triangle are that age themselves. So
good, that's
100% great. There is a link.
I'm glad we are on the same page then, because I was a bit worried about that link specifically. But I think
that it seems like weird, doesn't it? Like, oh yeah, Debut and Folklore.
So far away in
when
time.
You think about it, there definitely is a link. There is definitely 100%.
So then we have an arrow coming off of Folklore and going into Evermore, basically because Folklore and Evermore are sisters. These are the albums that started this whole idea. They're the albums that are the linked ones. There is no debate towards their connection. Taylor has made it quite clear. It makes sense sonically, lyrically, thematically. It all makes sense. They're just intrinsically connected forever.
Yeah, exactly. And even in a nerdy CD collector sense, the back and front covers are like the inverse of each other.
Yeah.
So they are even in packaging wise are made to look very similar.
Yeah. It's funny because even though that is the truth and we can't debate that, they do feel like two separate entities when you actually like properly sit down and explore them, which is basically what Taylor said. Yeah, they're sisters and they're very much related, but Evermore has its own personality. It's wilder.
Yes.
It's a bit sadder. It also has more hope to it, whereas Folklore is more grief-stricken. It's very summer. Yes. Evermore is very winter. It's very interesting how that all works out.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, we've gone into depth with it before, haven't we, about how, Folklore seems very sad in the moment, whereas Evermore seems to kind of tie up endings and deal with endings a lot more. And also was whereas Folklore kind of opened, it just opened this world for Taylor, didn't it? Evermore put a very good kind of like bookmark and opened into what came next very well. Even just with like what it ended with, It's Time to Go. It was just a very good... It closed off a chapter, and they both did things where Folklore opened, Evermore kind of closed, and then, but they are just so sonically linked, but so different. It's weird that they are the same, but they are so vastly different for me still.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I love that she did make that connection and did do a release like this, because not only was it extremely lucky for us to have two albums in 1 year, which was the first time that had ever happened at that point. Obviously, now we've been spoiled in many other different ways. But it was just so interesting to see how something can be similar, but not at all like boring. I know some people might disagree and say it was a bit too much. They didn't want a continuation to Folklore. That's fine. Everyone has different opinions, and people probably would then not really enjoy this arrow spanning from Red. They might enjoy a different arrow. Yeah. But I loved that she expanded on the universe that basically her Aaron Jack discovered and delved into. I love that. I love that we got Evermore.
100%. And I think also it then, led into things like The Vault, which further expands, the universe of albums, and things like 3am editions, or, All the Girls You Loved Before, and things like that I love seeing what, didn't make the cut and what was made around that time and influenced this and said this and did that. It's just so fun to see the whole picture and not just a very kind of carefully selected version of it. It's just fun to see what, was just being created and was part of that kind of creative process. So I love it. And I think, Evermore is just such an incredible album and very good. That's all I can say.
Yeah, no, I agree. And here's when we go into one of our first kind of like backwards influences in the sense, because it's a bit of a convoluted relationship between them. So this is one that you picked up on and I think is so interesting. So do you want to get into that?
Yeah, so basically, I think what's interesting with this family tree is obviously we're taking into factor the Taylor's versions, because now these are the versions of the albums that obviously as fans we should be consuming. So I think pre-Taylor's version, obviously this connection would never ever have linked, and like I would have never ever linked Evermore to probably anything.
Yeah, I think it would have kind of like your
pre-Taylor's version.
Yeah,
100%. But with Fearless, Taylor's version specifically, it was obviously created around the same time and after Evermore, and Evermore lyrically and sonically, I believe, really influenced the Vault of Fearless. And I just think the rewriting that was done on like Bye Bye Baby, for example, and just like sonically like on like Don't You and That's When, it's just so Evermore in its sound.
It
and
really
I think
is.
that without Evermore, if Evermore had never happened, I don't think that sound would have existed in the Fearless Vault. And like You All Over Me, for example, it just to me, you could shove those as deluxe Evermore tracks and I would generally have believed you and taken them as so. So I think
that's
in
crazy.
factoring Taylor's version, it is bonkers.
To think that like a song that we know was originally from so many years ago is so similar to her 9th studio album in the sense that the quality is still there.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Exactly. It just shows its madness. But 100% for me, standard Fearless definitely not so.
No, I
agree.
agree.
For Vault, I think that there is definitely a link, and Evermore definitely helped birth. It was almost like a surrogate.
Oh my god! Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It kind of like helped birth Fearless, but it isn't actually its mother.
No,
it just brought it brought the Vault into the world, but didn't really do anything major in terms of directly influencing.
Yeah. Fearless spent a winter with Evermore and came back as Fearless Taylor's version, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Basically spent the holidays with Evermore and was like, oh, you know what, actually,
this is my new personality now. No, I definitely agree. And I love to see those kind of links because, again, it is a big indicator of where Taylor's career basically led to. Like, we started in one world, we traveled to a very different world, then to another one, and the people that she worked with, the sounds that she was consuming, well, it obviously affected the re-recordings of these original pieces of art basically that were created many, many years prior. I love that so much. And again, even when it comes to visuals, Fearless is...
Yeah,
and Red. And Red, Taylor's version
and
as
Red,
well.
Yeah, they are direct influence off of Evermore. They are literally that photo shoot, so they are intrinsically linked anyway. And I think another link that I kind of hinted at going backwards as well is Folklore to Red. Yeah. I think for me, the Red Vault was definitely influenced by Folklore. I think things like Nothing New, as I mentioned, just sound so folklorian. And just the collaboration is very, Exile and Hoax in its kind of sound. So I think that definitely links there. And I think All Too Well 10 definitely had more of a folklore kind of sound in comparison to its original.
And then we had
version.
Like Sad Autumn Girl. I can't get
Autumn. Yes,
the version from
Sad Girl
Studio,
Autumn
from
version.
the Vault, from wherever. Yeah.
So they are, for me, those also linked. Again, Vault wise, I feel like standard album wise, it seems Red goes down to Folklore, but Vault wise, I definitely think that Folklore had a slight influence on Red. And again, obviously Taylor was recording these again similar time to Folklore, Evermore, Fearless, hence why they all are quite similar. And I do weirdly see those three as like a bit of a kind of unit. Like
I agree.
The Evermore, Fearless, Red. Yeah.
I think just aesthetically they look really good together. and also they do
exactly.
kind of feel together in time. And so we've discussed if you enjoyed the countryside of Red, where you could go. We've discussed if you enjoy the indie alternative lyricism side of Red, where that led. Now we're going to discuss the third arrow that comes off of Red, which is the pop side of it all. So think of, We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, I Knew You Were Trouble, The Very First Night.
The Very First Night.
Yes. Yeah, you knew where I was going. So these are like the big pop moments from Red that led to, basically chronologically, and then we'll also get into that, like, literally as well, how it led to it. But just like sound-wise, it did lead to the big pop album, which is the mother of all other 100%. Pop albums, 1989.
Yes, definitely. It's so insanely linked, as you said, like just from, without the Red era, 1989 would have never been born anyway. But without her being able to explore those a more pop sound, 1989 would have never really been allowed, because obviously the success of that pop sound led to her thinking, you know what, let's just make the full jump into pop and just categorize it as totally pop and the only reference be pop.
Definitely. Yeah, it is that going straight towards pop, running right towards it into its arms and just embracing it fully. And yeah, without Red, there is no 1989. It makes sense in many different ways, like you just said, exploring the genre, but also, as we all know, if Red hadn't have lost that Grammy, who knows where it would have led us. So it led us directly into 1989, luckily. So
definitely.
Yeah, interesting to see that.
As you said, even though obviously we've kind of categorized Red as like the mother of the family tree, 1989 is the mother of pop albums, of Taylor Swift pop albums. And like, or everything post 1989 that is pop just is in some way 1989 influences or just, references in some way. It's just interesting that 1989 then basically is like has children of its own off of Red.
Yeah, which makes Red a grandmother. In some ways, it makes sense. Yeah. It makes sense. We'll get into it, though. So from 1989, again, we have a few arrows spanning, and it gets a bit messy what's coming up. But I think we should go chronologically once again. 1989 leads directly to Reputation. Again, there's no other way. 100%. They're so linked. But mainly, I don't see this one as a lyrical link. I don't see it as a thematic link. I don't see it as anything that way. I see it literally as like an in real life, without this, there is no this.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, Reputation is the 1989 era. Like, that's literally what it's, discussing. And that's what it's kind of referencing. And, even things like, This Way You Can't Have Nice Things, or the whole kind of Gatsby element, that was Taylor Swift's life. So yeah, Reputation physically would not exist without 1989. Like, it doesn't matter if it doesn't sound the same, if it's not lyrically the same, it just would not straight up exist without 1989 and that era that entailed post that album.
Yeah, many of the themes that are explored in Reputation are the end result of the final that the 1989 era came to, like how it came to a close, led to many of the things that happened prior to Reputation, influenced Reputation, and then, that's why Reputation was born out of that horrible wreckage of what became of the 1989 era in many ways, which has now been reclaimed. And I feel like now we can all look at 1989 in a different light after 1989 Taylor's version, which is just another extra nice thing that came about thanks to the re-recording, to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely. It is interesting how, and this is slightly off-piece, but the re-records in general do recontextualise the eras, and I think that especially for fans that weren't there, and obviously Taylor does kind of recontextualise them even in like the prologues, and obviously she sometimes recontextualised them in a very like hindsight way that's like, it wasn't really like that, but it's cute to think of it like that. And sometimes it's like, yeah, that is very true. There's elements, and that happens with everything. Memories are kind of sometimes misconstrued and aren't maybe exactly what happened. But I think it is quite nice, and sometimes it's quite nice to have them recontextualize, and it's just interesting how then newer fans that weren't around during those eras, how then they view that era from, basically being mainly exposed to it from a Taylor's version and then going back and exploring it, because it's like, it is just interesting when you were actually there and what really happened and what people's real feelings were towards it.
Really interesting. If there's anyone listening that didn't experience the original 1989 era or never really had much of a connection to the 1989 album prior to Taylor's version coming out, let us know how you feel about the 1989 album without having that prior connection to it. Because that's an interesting thought, to be honest with you. And if you were there for both or enjoy both, let us know as well. Like, how do you feel about it in hindsight?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think also it's going to be really interesting with Reputation, Taylor's version, because when Reputation was released, it was not well received. Like, critically, it didn't get a good response at all. It was totally misunderstood. It was seen as some sort of like manipulative
revenge
album.
It's not. It really
revenge
isn't.
album.
It really isn't.
And it just was, it just wasn't what it is deemed now. Like everyone loves Reputation now. At the time, it was only loved and understood by fans. It really was not loved or understood by the general public at all. No. Quite the opposite.
And it's only towards
it was so successful.
The Reputation tour where people kind of saw that, no, this album isn't about this or that or the other. It is.
To be fair,
much
I think it was the Netflix.
Is a return to form in many ways.
Yeah. I think it was the Netflix Rep Tour where people were like, oh, because that was one of the first times that people had actually really seen Taylor, like during the Reputation era, because no one had really seen her talk about it. So all they were seeing was what the media were giving them. And I think it's just so interesting.
Well, this is it.
How people now view Reputation.
There will be no
and I'll be so intrigued how.
And
exactly, yeah. I think it will be interesting to see how it then gets perceived with the Taylor's version, because, and what critically it gets perceived and what people like to say, because it was just not what people make out.
Definitely.
It was not this big girl boss power moment. At the time, it was quite the opposite. It was taken as this like revengeful evil album that was just as kickback at Kanye West. That was generally how it was seen. Whereas now, thankfully, it's been understood for what it actually was.
I do think this is we've said this before, but it is one of the albums that it was ahead of its time in many ways, in themes, in sound. And Jack Antonoff recently said in an interview late last year that Reputation goes off like it does. It really does.
Oh, yeah,
and
it's
nowadays,
so good, yeah.
We realise that, and it's going to be very interesting for it to have its own moment again. However, on the other hand, it is also interesting because certain elements from this album may be very much downplayed this time around because of, obviously, circumstances that happen in life. So Taylor's in a very different position, shall we say, from the first time that Reputation was released in many different ways, both in a personal and public life. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how people's perception, the same as what we were talking about for 1989, how people's perception on Reputation changes. And for us who were both there, lived through it real time, it's going to be very interesting to see.
Oh yeah, I love it. I love seeing it recontextualized. It's just fun.
Definitely. And speaking of Reputation and going back to the connections between everything and anything, we have, like we said, connected it from 1989 to Reputation, but I also think that we can add another connection here from Speak Now to Reputation.
Yes, this was your suggestion, so I want to hear your
It's always me with the weird stuff.
For the connection.
So I feel like Speak Now and Reputation are just connected in my head because a lot of people who love Speak Now love Reputation. A lot of people who love Reputation love Speak Now. And I think it's because in many ways there is a side to Reputation that is very much, I'm not going to hold back anymore. I'm just going to say my piece. I'm just going to, again, there will be no other explanation. They will just be Reputation. Everything is stated in this album. And that's the same for Speak Now. She promoted it as, I was holding back things that maybe I wanted to say in the moment and I didn't say, which is very much 1989 era coded. And in this album, I am saying them, which is very much what Reputation is in many ways. In other ways, there's different aspects to it, which we'll get into that side of it in just a second. But no, I feel like Reputation and Speak Now are related because of that. Also, there is kind of like more of an angst vibe going on in some of the songs, more of like, I feel like Castles Crumbling is extremely interesting.
Oh, yes.
To view in the light of Reputation, because it is the mini
and especially,
Reputation of it all.
Yes, especially with obviously who basically, obviously, to be quite bare about it and open and honest. Obviously, like the VMAs with Kanye West was obviously a big influence of some of the songs on Speak Now, like things like Castles Crumbling and
Innocent.
Innocent, and then obviously Reputation. The main reason for Reputation is because of what happened with Kanye West.
Yeah.
So it is very interesting how Castles Crumbling is basically, little does she know it, a precursor to what is actually going to come, because what she thought was going to come didn't really.
No.
But it did
many years later.
on.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So that's how I view that, and I'm glad that you kind of
I definitely get behind that. I think that the kind of themes of the album, with the whole say it, this is what I'm saying, I should have said it at the time, I'm saying it now, this is how I'm saying it, definitely link between the two 100%. And even that kind of angsty, haunted, Better Than Revenge vibe is definitely in Reputation. It's all over it. But I think they definitely do link.
Before we move on to what comes after Reputation, I think we should give an honourable mention to a connection that many of us probably have drawn between Reputation and another album recently, just because of the situation that we are in right now, which is the debutation of it all. I love that. I love that so much. I love how people have come up with debutation. I love this kind of relation between Debut and Reputation being the last two left in the vault. This has got a lot to do also with Aleph Vernon's amazing art, and the series and the worlds that he creates. Gosh, how creative is that? But
oh my god, they're the most gorgeous illustrations ever, and to be fair, they do impact how I relate albums and see them, because the illustrations they do that, and they relate certain ones, and certain ones get on with others, and seeing
I love that.
Illustrations of Debut and Reputation together hanging out is just oh my god, how would 16-year-old Debut Taylor take Reputation Taylor, and them kind of falling out a bit, and it's just and them coming together as two, and Reputation is kind of looking after Debut, because it kind of knows what's coming. I do love that kind of thing.
The personification that he's made of these albums, and the whole stories that he's making of Folklore and Evermore, and how they met Lover. I love it.
Yes. Lover's perspective of it all. Yeah, it's so unbelievably creative. But it's so funny because Debut and Reputation for me couldn't be, out of every single one of these albums, couldn't be further apart from each other.
Right, okay.
Sonically, thematically, everything for me are so far apart, but weirdly have now been kind of linked together, because they're kind of the last two to get out and be Taylor's versionified.
I don't know though, because I do see the relation, the same way as I see a relation somehow between Speak Now and Reputation. It could have gone the same way between Debut and Reputation, in the sense that Debut was not afraid to speak her mind. She's got songs out here like Picture to Burn, and some of the cut songs from that album. She was out here.
Yeah, RAVNGE, Should Have Said No.
Exactly.
Oh, and and even other unreleased songs, Who I've Always Been and stuff, they just have this sass about them that she didn't care. So no, there is, I suppose, a little bit of a link that both of them didn't really care what they were saying.
Oh, definitely. But I love that connection of Debut and Reputation together. And honestly, I'm devastated to think about Poor Little Debut, if Reputation is released next, which we're guessing that it will be, and Poor Little Debut alone in there,
all by herself. Bless her,
Debut.
I know. But to be fair, she's been here the longest, so hopefully she's kind of the toughest now.
Exactly. But anyway, moving on from that, whatever that was. Another big connection, again, between everything. We've moved into a more of a chronological perspective as we've gone into these pop albums, because they are very much related in time as well. But I think Reputation and Lover have to be related. They just have to.
Yes.
It's very much same story, different side of the coin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's one coin, two different sides. It's just it's looking at the same story, but from just from a negative, not a negative perspective, because it's still positive that what she sings about, but obviously from a when you're kind of, your stalk is down a bit, to the total opposite, when life you feel like you've escaped the tunnel a bit. And it's a bit more colourful and pink rather than all black and grey.
Black and white.
But they are the same.
Like
that, They are the same thing to me. Lover is a continuation of Reputation, and would have never come around. And obviously, every album post the album that was, every album that comes after an album obviously would have never come around if the one before hadn't. But the experiences that Reputation went through, the Reputation Taylor went through, and the positive stuff that happened because of the Reputation era and the Reputation tour was then what made her want to create an album that was fun and happy and, you know, was a reflection of how she was feeling. And that's obviously how Lover and its aesthetics came around. You know, its aesthetics were born from that.
Yeah, definitely. Lover and Reputation, for me, I agree, they're very much in conversation with each other. Obviously, again, not to get too much into Taylor's personal life of it all, but many of the themes and topics which are related to where she was at that point in time.
Who she was with.
Yeah, they're very much connected. They go together. They're hand in hand, but like you said, one exists because of the other, and the stories that they tell kind of go down two different paths in exploring different parts of that time in her life, different ways things went.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of kind of the family tree element, obviously Folklore and Evermore we've distinguished as, you know, as Taylor has distinguished herself and is very clear, our sisters. Would you say the same about Reputation and Lover? How would you see them as a family tree element?
Oh, I don't know. I've seen people discuss this before as like Folklore and Evermore are sisters that love each other, and Reputation and Lover are sisters that despise each other.
Fallen out, yeah.
Which is, it's kind of, I don't know, in a way it is a bit like that, but I always, when I describe them, I've said this a couple of times now, I do feel like they're like two different sides of a story, which is a bit strange. But I don't know. I think before you were saying cousins or something to me, right?
Yeah, maybe like cousins, but then I feel like
from each other in a way.
Yeah, but I feel like cousins, there's an element of cousins that they don't know each other very well. You know, there's an element of distance, whereas Reputation and Lover know each other well, but they are just so vastly different.
Isn't it crazy to look at Reputation next to Lover?
Just visually.
Yeah.
It's even just so the album
weird,
covers.
Really, isn't it? Like to see that.
They're just so vastly different. And
one would go to another, you know?
No,
and then Lover
exactly.
to Folklore is the same, really. But
yeah, exactly. Then she goes, black and white again. I think to be fair, that's a good analogy. Is that they are maybe sisters that just don't get along because
they're estranged.
You know, one. Yeah. It's almost because they've had the same experience, but one's had a more positive outcome that the other is almost slightly jealous of the other, and they just don't really like each other because of that. Which is this is all getting a little weird. These are albums, you know. We are not crazy.
We're just creating that, but you know, for all of
this is all just for fun. This is all just for fun. We're all good. You know, these are albums. We understand that, but it's just interesting.
And speaking of Lover, I think we also have to mention, again, another connection towards her previous bodies of work, because I do think, again, like the Speak Now Reputation one, like the debut Folklore one, this is just interesting. And I've always felt like Red and Lover are so similar in so many ways.
Oh, yeah.
Like Red is just like the heartbreak of it all, and Lover is the lovey-dovey romanticism of it all. That is what it is, really. They're both very long albums. They're both extremely eclectic albums. Both of them show hints of what is coming next. Both of them have this... I always compare All Too Well and Cornelia Street in my head, because All Too Well and Cornelia Street are, again, very similar songs, but with very different endings to them.
Yes.
I don't know.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay,
couldn't agree more. Yeah, as you said, they are like sonically eclectic. Yeah, and I think it's also interesting when you look at the promo of Lover, like the promotion of Lover is totally paired with Red. Obviously, for example, with Daylight, you have the lyric, I once believed love would be burning red, but it's golden, obviously a direct reference to a line from the song Red. But I think what's also interesting, going back to what we were saying, is there's also a reference on Daylight to Reputation, where I once believed love would be black and white. So it's interesting that both of these that we are kind of linking is because of mentions within the album itself. But I think even just the general promo for Red, every performance that Taylor did, even when it was only 3 or 4 songs that she was doing, there was always a Red song that she played. You know, she wasn't playing like the hits like Blank Space or Shake It Off. You know, she was playing
Holy Ground,
the song Red, All Too Well, which at the time was not a single and was not anywhere near what it is now. You know, she was referencing previous songs that seem to be slightly referenced or, you know, linked to Lover. And I think that Taylor herself maybe saw that link to Red. And I think that, they are linked because of that. Even just the way that Lover was promoted alongside Red it's just so interesting. And as you said, they, in terms of just being, I think what's also interesting is that they all also both lead to a Grammy Album of the Year. Like Red obviously was so very kind of very kind of chaotic in its sound, and was experimenting with new things, and was a bit of a kind of breakaway from what she'd done before. Then obviously what then came next was this incredibly sonically cohesive, well planned out, perfect, polished pop album. Then obviously Lover again was this kind of breakaway from Big Machine, a very, very sonically eclectic, she was exploring everything. And then again, what then came next was this kind of total breakdown of that, the opposite almost of what 1989 was. Rather than a perfect polished, it was just like, let's just go back to basics, let's just go back to what I know, let's just go to songwriting and make it about that. And obviously then came Folklore, an album winning, a Grammy Album of the Year winning album. So it's just interesting. I think they are very similar, even though obviously they are very, very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, they're miles apart, but at the same time, like you said, it's interesting to see all those parallels between them and how she even picked up on that and kind of like delved into the Red era before we even got Red Taylor's version or any semblance of any of that. So, no, I definitely agree with you. It's interesting to see that relation as well, yeah. And I guess that leads us to the last album on our tree. The last album chronologically, if we think of it as, main releases, the 10 studio albums. And in a way, Midnight's could have been related to almost every single album on the tree. If you think about it, if you break down song by song, there is a little...
And we've done a whole episode basically about that.
Yeah, we have. So if you want to check that out, where we go more in depth of every single song and how it's related, or where it, what album it's related to, what album that music could have been on, if it weren't on Midnight's, you can check that out. We'll link that as well. But no, in a way, Midnight's could have been related to every single thing, but we decided to just have like parents. The parents of Midnight's that lead to Midnight's, the two biggest influences, I think, on Midnight's. Which is funny when you think of it, how this is all worked out and how these two are the ones that we're going to discuss that lead to Midnight's. I think some people will definitely agree with this thought and other people will be very opposed to this thought. But let us know. What we've done is we've kind of given 1989 and Lover both arrows that converge and go towards Midnight's. And between them, they kind of like create what Midnight's is, which is interesting because we could have linked it to many different ones.
Yeah, you could link it to like Reputation. Lots of people you could pull on like the vigilante shit kind of vibe, is obviously kind of reference Mastermind. That kind of vibe feels very Reputation in a sense. There's also elements of like, like the 3 a.m. editions. You could definitely link back to things like Evermore. But I think that when you look at Midnight sonically, and just the vibe of the era, the album, for me, it just is Lover and 1989, just,
mashed together.
Birth to child.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. 1989, sonically, the way it was promoted, the big promotion of it all. I don't know, the people who she worked with. Obviously, Jack Antonoff being the big collaborator.
Yeah.
I don't know, the aesthetics. And I think this is one of those backwards connections as well that we discussed with Evermore influencing Taylor's version of Fearless, Folklore influencing Taylor's version of Red. I do feel like Midnight influenced Taylor's version of 1989 in the same way that 1989 influenced Midnight's.
Yes, definitely. I think definitely that Midnight's had a massive effect on the 1989 Vault. And it does, it definitely impacted it. And it is just, it's interesting how, it's weird, it's almost like how, say with like 1989 was like, it was her exploration of pop, like she was like, this is me going fully fledged pop. Obviously Midnight's came off the back of 2 indie folk albums. And Midnight's was almost like a return to pop of like, this is... I'm going to show, like Bejeweled, I'm going to show them. I can still do this. I'm still I'm still a pop star. And it's almost like she went back to what would be deemed as like the pop album, the perfect kind of pop albums like Lover and 1989, and kind of, re-referenced them on Midnight's. And it definitely is for me. It's definitely intrinsically linked to Lover and 1989 and weirdly influences 1989 in itself with the Taylor's version.
Yeah, and then I think it also has to be related to Lover in many different ways, just because Lover was quite a big pop album as well. You can't argue with that. It is a big pop staple. Hits like Cruel Summer are literally kicking out of the charts other more recent hits, and there's suddenly like Cruel Summer has been nominated for like loads of iHeart awards. It's crazy to see, honestly.
Yeah,
a song from 2019 be
exactly, like nearly like a 5-year-old song.
Oh, crazy to think.
Is doing that. It's just bonkers, and it's being received as if it's a brand new song.
Yeah, I definitely think the work that Taylor did with Jack on Lover very much influences and is kind of like evolved into the work that she does with him on Midnights. Lavender Haze 100%. Being there, that sound that appears throughout Midnights. But then, like you said, I do think another honourable mention of a connection is Folklore and Evermore with Midnights, because especially those 3am tracks, but like Sweet Nothing, Labyrinth, they do remind me of that sound as well.
No, 100%. Like, but I do think the 3am 100%. I would link more to Evermore. I'd say like The Great War to me, High Infidelity feel very Evermore in the way that they're kind of described. They feel slightly
experimentally,
experimentally, slightly Closure.
Right, okay, I see
like, that. A Long Story Short, they have that kind of sonic sound.
I can see where you're going with that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so we've now come to the end of this family tree. Hopefully, we kind of made it clear and we made some sense. But please do comment down below. Let us know, how you link the albums. If we made some connections that you were like, no, big fat no, what are you doing? Or did we miss any that you think, no, this is 100% this? Please let us know in the comments. Give all your reasonings. We want to hear it. We want to see. We love things like this. It's just fun.
It really is.
Just do stuff that just you would never, like, this is a conversation I would never have with anyone, because they probably turn around to me and think I'm crazy.
How could you? They'd be like, after 10 minutes, they'd be like, okay, that's enough now.
Okay, go away. It's a bit like that meme, with that like kid with the old lady, and it's like, let's, get you back in your bed,
Yeah, Red is mother.
Exactly, yeah. Red and Love are intrinsically linked, I promise. It's like, okay, Nan, let's go back to bed.
Oh, God.
So yeah, please let us know all your thoughts, because we'd love to hear it, and we love doing stuff like this. This is we kind of came off the back really of everyone's love for Taylor Swift albums as seasons, and I think it's really fun to look at kind of themes that maybe aren't ever really discussed. But if you did enjoy, as we said, let us know in the comments, give us your thoughts, but please also subscribe to us on YouTube and give this video, if you are watching on YouTube, a thumbs up. If you're listening over on Apple or Spotify, then please also rate us if you did enjoy, and make sure to follow us over on Instagram as well, just to keep up with new announcements when episodes come out. And if you are interested in following us over there, then our handle is @SwiftlySpokenPodcast. But as ever, thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed, and we'll see you all soon.